A new era begins. The sun spilled its golden light over the skyline of Atlanta, Georgia on a crisp Monday morning, illuminating the city's hustle and bustle. Nestled among the towering skyscrapers was First Horizon Bank, an institution that prided itself on excellence and tradition. Inside, the air hummed with activity as customers moved between tellers and advisors, the scent of fresh coffee lingering faintly in the air. It was a busy day, but for Ethan Caldwell, the newly appointed branch manager, it was a moment of reckoning. Ethan had only been in his new role for 2 weeks. At 33, he was one of the youngest managers in the bank's 50-year history. With his tailored charcoal suit, neatly combed hair, and leather briefcase, Ethan exuded ambition and confidence. But beneath his polished exterior, there was a deep desire to prove himself, to show his superiors that he wasn't just a product of privilege and connections, but a leader capable of elevating the branch to new heights. The morning had been smooth so far. Ethan had already reviewed last week's performance reports, held a quick meeting with his team, and even greeted a few regular customers with his signature smile. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until the doors of the bank opened, and an unassuming man walked in. The man, who appeared to be in his late 40s, wore a simple navy blue sweater, khaki pants, and polished black shoes. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and wore a modest wristwatch. His dark skin gleamed under the overhead lights, and his neatly trimmed beard gave him an air of sophistication. Despite his understated appearance, there was something about his demeanor, an effortless confidence that drew attention. Ethan, who had been chatting with a teller near the counter, glanced at the man briefly before returning his attention to his colleague. However, as the man approached the counter, Ethan's gaze lingered. The customer greeted the teller with a warm smile and a polite nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'd like to make a deposit." The teller, a young woman named Carla, smiled back. "Of course, sir. Could you please provide your account details?" The man reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sleek, embossed card. "Here you go," he said, handing it to Carla. Ethan, always alert, noticed the subtle hesitation in Carla's movements as she glanced at the card. Curious, he stepped forward. "Carla, I'll take care of this one," he said, his tone firm but friendly. Carla nodded and stepped aside, her expression unreadable. Ethan turned to the man with a professional smile. "Good morning, sir. I'm Ethan Caldwell, the branch manager. I'll personally assist you with your transaction." The man nodded politely. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I appreciate that." Ethan examined the card and entered the account number into the system. As the details loaded on the screen, his brows furrowed slightly. The account balance displayed on the monitor was staggering. $380 million. Ethan blinked, certain he had made an error. He double-checked the number, his disbelief growing. The man before him was, by all indications, a multi-millionaire. Ethan glanced up, his eyes narrowing slightly. The man's attire, while neat, didn't scream wealth. There were no designer labels, no ostentatious jewelry, nothing to suggest that he owned a fortune large enough to rival small nations. Something about this didn't add up. "Everything okay?" the man asked, noticing Ethan's prolonged silence. "Yes," Ethan replied, his tone clipped. "It's just unusual to see an account with this level of activity. How much are you looking to deposit today?" $250 million. The man replied matter-of-factly, his calm demeanor unwavering. Ethan froze, his mind racing. A deposit of that magnitude was not only unprecedented, but also highly irregular. Protocol dictated that such transactions be scrutinized carefully to prevent fraud or money laundering. His instincts, honed over years in the banking industry, told him to proceed with caution. "I'll need to verify some additional information," Ethan said, his voice carrying a note of skepticism. "Of course," the man said, retrieving a business card from his briefcase. "This should answer any questions you might have." Ethan accepted the card, but barely glanced at it. Instead, he fixed the man with a measured look. "I'll be honest with you," he said. "Transactions of this size are extremely rare, especially for walk-in customers. We have strict policies in place to prevent fraudulent activity." The man's calm expression didn't waver. "I understand. I assure you, this is a legitimate transaction." Ethan crossed his arms, his doubt evident. "If this is some sort of scam, I'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement." The man's gaze hardened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Mr. Caldwell. I'm simply here to conduct business." The tension in the room was palpable. Customers and staff alike had begun to notice the exchange, their curious glances darting between Ethan and the man. The atmosphere, once bustling with activity, now felt heavy with anticipation. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had worked too hard to let his branch become the target of a sophisticated scam, and yet there was something about the man's composure that unsettled him, a quiet confidence that didn't fit the profile of a con artist. Before Ethan could respond, the glass doors of the bank swung open, and a tall, impeccably dressed man entered. He wore a tailored suit, and his salt and pepper hair was slicked back with precision. His presence commanded immediate attention, and the room seemed to quiet as he strode purposefully toward the counter. "What seems to be the issue here?" the man asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Ethan turned, his face flushing slightly. "Mr. Hastings," he began, addressing the bank's regional director. "This gentleman claims to have $250 million to deposit. I was just ensuring that everything is in order." Mr. Hastings raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze shifting to the customer. "And why would you assume that everything isn't in order?" he asked pointedly. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's just unusual, sir. We don't typically see deposits of this magnitude, especially from walk-in clients." The customer, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. "If there's a problem, Mr. Hastings, perhaps I should take my business elsewhere." Hastings's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Wait a moment," he said, stepping closer to the man. "You're Richard Ellison, aren't you?" The man nodded. "I am." Ethan's heart sank. The name was familiar. Richard Ellison was a tech entrepreneur who had revolutionized the digital payments industry. His company, Ellison Dynamics, was a household name, and his success story had been featured in countless business publications. Ethan had just accused one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the country of being a scammer. "I deeply apologize, Mr. Ellison," Hastings said, his tone respectful. "I assure you, this is not how we typically conduct business. Please allow us to complete your transaction immediately." Ethan stood frozen, his face burning with embarrassment as the weight of his mistake settled over him. The lesson was clear. Appearances could be deceiving, and assumptions could lead to costly errors. As the transaction continued under Mr. Hastings' supervision, Ethan realized that his actions had not only jeopardized a crucial client relationship but also his own credibility. The day was far from over, but Ethan knew it would be one he would never forget. This moment would either define him as a leader who learned from his mistakes, or as one who let his biases cloud his judgment. Only time would tell. Shadows of doubt. The aftermath of the encounter with Richard Ellison lingered like a dark cloud over Ethan Caldwell's mind. As the morning transitioned into the early afternoon, the rhythmic hum of First Verizon Bank seemed to mock his earlier confidence. He replayed the scene repeatedly in his head, his sharp words, the disapproving murmurs of the onlookers, and most damningly, the composed yet firm response of the man he had misjudged so spectacularly. Seated in his glass-walled office, Ethan stared at the stack of untouched files on his desk. His fingers drummed nervously on the polished surface, the usually comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee doing little to calm his nerves. The bank's regional director, Mr. Hastings, had personally overseen the remainder of Richard Ellison's transaction, leaving Ethan feeling sidelined and exposed. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the creeping realization that he might have damaged not only his own reputation, but also the bank's relationship with one of the most influential entrepreneurs in the country. The phone on his desk rang, pulling him from his thoughts. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Ethan Caldwell speaking. Ethan. Mr. Hastings's voice came through, firm but not angry. Come to my office. Now. The walk to Hastings's office felt longer than it was. The glass walls of the bank seemed to amplify the scrutiny he imagined from every passing employee. Hastings's office was at the far end of the building, a space that exuded authority with its rich mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and the subtle scent of leather. Hastings sat behind the desk, his piercing gray eyes fixed on Ethan as he entered. Close the door, Hastings said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Ethan complied, his stomach tightening as he took a seat. Hastings didn't waste time with pleasantries. Ethan, do you understand the gravity of what happened this morning? Ethan nodded slowly. I do, sir. I made a mistake. Mistake is an understatement, Hastings said, his tone sharp. Richard Ellison is not just any customer. He's a figurehead in the tech industry, a man whose influence extends far beyond his wealth. Do you realize how lucky we are that he didn't pull his accounts from our bank on the spot? I do, sir, Ethan said again, his voice quieter this time. I acted on instinct, but clearly I was wrong. Hastings leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan. Instinct is a valuable asset in this business, but it must be tempered with judgment. What made you so quick to assume he wasn't who he claimed to be? Ethan hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He didn't fit the profile, sir. His appearance, his demeanor, it just didn't match the account balance. I thought I was protecting the bank. Hastings's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Ethan, banking is about relationships as much as it is about numbers. Our customers trust us with their wealth, their privacy, and their dignity. If we treat them with suspicion or disrespect, we lose that trust, and with it, their business. Ethan looked down, ashamed. I understand, sir. Hastings sighed, his tone softening. I'm not saying this to berate you, Ethan. I see potential in you. That's why I supported your promotion. But potential means nothing if you don't learn from your mistakes. Richard Ellison is a man of principles. If you want to make this right, you'll need to show him that you're capable of growth. Ethan's head snapped up. You think there's a way to fix this? Hastings nodded. Possibly, but it'll take more than an apology. You'll need to prove to him that you're not the man he met this morning. The next day, Ethan arrived at the bank earlier than usual. He had barely slept, his mind racing with plans on how to repair the damage. He knew Hastings was right. Words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to take action, to demonstrate that he was more than the sum of his mistakes. After hours of research, Ethan discovered something that gave him hope. Richard Ellison was not just a tech mogul. He was also a philanthropist deeply invested in community development projects. One of his initiatives, the Ellison Opportunity Fund, provided grants to underserved communities to support education, entrepreneurship, and housing. Ethan realized this was his chance to align himself with Ellison's values and perhaps regain his trust. That afternoon, Ethan called a meeting with his team. As they gathered in the conference room, he stood at the head of the table, his usual polished demeanor replaced with an air of determination. Team, he began, yesterday I made a mistake, a serious one. I misjudged a client, and in doing so, I let down not just him, but all of you and this institution. I want to take responsibility for that, and I intend to make it right. The staff exchanged glances, surprised by Ethan's candidness. I'd spent the last 24 hours thinking about how we, as a branch, can do better. Richard Ellison isn't just a wealthy client. He's someone who believes in giving back to the community. And if we want to earn back his trust, we need to show him that we share those values. Ethan outlined his plan. The bank would partner with local organizations to host financial literacy workshops, targeting underprivileged neighborhoods in Atlanta. The initiative would be funded in part by a contribution from the branch's community engagement budget, with the rest coming from a fundraiser Ethan planned to spearhead personally. The goal was not just to provide education, but also to offer microloans to aspiring entrepreneurs, echoing the principles of Ellison's own foundation. The team listened intently, their initial skepticism giving way to cautious enthusiasm. Carla, the teller from the previous day, was the first to speak. "It's a great idea, Ethan. But do you really think Mr. Ellison will notice?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I don't just want him to notice. I want him to see that we're serious about making a difference, that we're not just a bank, but a part of this community." Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into the project. He reached out to local nonprofits, coordinated with small business owners, and even spent weekends knocking on doors in underprivileged neighborhoods to spread the word about the workshops. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. The staff, inspired by his dedication, began volunteering their own time to help with the initiative. The bank, once seen as a distant and impersonal institution, started to build genuine connections with the community. The first workshop was held in a local community center, a modest building with peeling paint and worn-out chairs. Despite its humble appearance, the room was packed with people, single mothers, young entrepreneurs, and retirees, all eager to learn how to take control of their finances. Ethan, who had never considered himself much of a public speaker, stood at the front of the room and delivered an impassioned presentation on budgeting, saving, and building credit. As the weeks went on, the initiative gained momentum. Media outlets picked up the story, praising the bank's efforts to uplift the community. And then, one day, Ethan received a call from Mr. Hastings. "Richard Ellison wants to meet with you," Hastings said. "He's been following the workshops and wants to hear more about your plans." Ethan's heart raced. This was it, the opportunity he had been waiting for. But it was also a test, and he knew he couldn't afford to fail. The meeting took place in a private room at one of Ellison's office buildings. As Ethan walked in, he saw Ellison seated at a long glass table, his expression neutral but attentive. The room was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. "Mr. Ellison," Ethan began, extending his hand. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." Ellison shook his hand, his grip firm. "I've been hearing a lot about your recent work," he said. "It's impressive." Ethan nodded, humbled. "I appreciate that, sir, but it's not just about me. It's about the team and the community. We've all come together to make this happen." Ellison leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan. "Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, what changed? The man I met a few weeks ago didn't strike me as someone who cared about community development." Ethan took a deep breath. "You're right, sir. I was too focused on my own ambitions, too quick to judge. Meeting you, and realizing how wrong I was, forced me to reevaluate what kind of leader I want to be. I don't want to just manage a branch. I want to make a difference." Ellison's expression softened slightly. "And you believe these workshops are the way to do that?" "It's a start," Ethan said, "but it's also a way to show you, and the community, that we're committed to doing better." Ellison nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've got my attention, Mr. Caldwell. Let's see where this goes." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He had made mistakes, but he was learning, and perhaps, just perhaps, he was on his way to redemption. A test of commitment. The meeting with Richard Ellison left Ethan energized yet cautious. For the first time since his mistake, he felt like he was steering things in the right direction. But Ellison's words lingered in his mind. "Let's see where this goes." It wasn't an endorsement. It was a challenge. Ellison was watching, waiting to see if Ethan's commitment to change was genuine or a fleeting attempt at damage control. Ethan returned to the bank that afternoon with a renewed sense of purpose. He gathered his team in the conference room and laid out the next steps for their community engagement initiative. "We're off to a great start," Ethan began, standing at the head of the table. His usual polished demeanor was now tempered with a sense of humility. But this isn't about one workshop or one program. If we want to make a lasting impact, we need to think bigger. I want us to focus on sustainability, not just for our clients, but for the community as a whole. The team listened intently, their initial reservations about Ethan's transformation slowly giving way to genuine admiration. Carla, the teller who had initially questioned his efforts, raised her hand. "What do you have in mind, Ethan?" she asked. Ethan smiled, grateful for the opportunity to elaborate. "I've been researching grants and partnerships. There are organizations that fund financial literacy programs and small business incubators. If we can secure some of those resources, we can expand our reach and offer more than just advice. We can provide real, tangible support." Another team member, James, chimed in. "That sounds great, but how do we convince those organizations to back us? We're just one branch of a bank." Ethan nodded, acknowledging the challenge. "We convinced them by showing results. The workshops we've done so far are just the beginning. I want us to track every success story, every family or business we've helped. Those stories will be our proof, our leverage." The room buzzed with excitement as the team began brainstorming ways to collect and document their progress. Ethan felt a swell of pride. This was no longer just about him or his mistake. This was a team effort, a collective mission to rebuild trust and make a difference. The community responds. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and his team poured their energy into expanding the initiative. They partnered with local schools to offer financial literacy classes for teenagers, teaching them the basics of saving, budgeting, and responsible credit use. They collaborated with small business owners to host networking events, connecting aspiring entrepreneurs with mentors and investors. One Saturday morning, Ethan found himself at a bustling farmers market, handing out flyers for an upcoming workshop. The market, held in one of Atlanta's underserved neighborhoods, was a vibrant mix of colors, smells, and sounds. Local vendors sold everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts, their stalls buzzing with activity. As Ethan made his way through the crowd, he was approached by an older woman carrying a bag of fresh vegetables. "Are you the man from the bank?" she asked, her tone curious but warm. Ethan smiled. "Yes, Mom. I'm Ethan Caldwell. How can I help you?" The woman nodded approvingly. "I've been hearing about those workshops you've been doing. My grandson wants to start his own landscaping business, but he doesn't know where to begin. Do you think one of your programs could help him?" "Absolutely," Ethan replied. He pulled out a flyer and handed it to her. "We're hosting a session next week on small business planning and financing. Tell your grandson to come by. We'd love to help him get started." The woman's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. It's good to see someone trying to help this community for a change." As she walked away, Ethan felt a surge of emotion. Moments like this reminded him why he was doing this, not just to fix his mistake, but to genuinely make a difference. Ellison's unexpected visit. 2 months after their initial meeting, Richard Ellison paid an unannounced visit to the bank. Ethan was in his office, reviewing a grant proposal, when Carla knocked on his door. "Ethan," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "Mr. Ellison is here. He wants to see you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He quickly straightened his tie and stepped out of his office, trying to project confidence despite the nervous energy coursing through him. Ellison was standing near the entrance, dressed in a tailored gray suit that exuded quiet authority. He was speaking with one of the tellers, but turned as Ethan approached. "Mr. Ellison," Ethan said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you again." Ellison shook his hand, his expression unreadable. "I thought I'd stop by and see how things are progressing," he said. "Of course," Ethan replied, gesturing toward the conference room. "Let's sit down, and I'll give you a full update." As they settled into the conference room, Ethan began outlining the progress they had made. He spoke about the workshops, the partnerships, and the community response. He showed Ellison a portfolio of testimonials from participants, stories of people who had started businesses, gotten out of debt, or simply gain the confidence to take control of their finances. Ellison listened carefully, his expression remaining neutral. When Ethan finished, he closed the portfolio and leaned back in his chair. "You've done a lot in a short amount of time," Ellison said. "I'll admit, I wasn't sure if your commitment was genuine, but it seems you've proven me wrong." Ethan felt a wave of relief but kept his composure. "Thank you, sir. I've learned a lot over these past few months, not just about the community but about myself. I'm grateful for the chance to make things right." Ellison nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You've made a good start, but there's still more to be done." Ethan nodded eagerly. "Absolutely, sir. We're just getting started. A new opportunity." The following week, Ethan received a call from Ellison's office. The tech mogul wanted to meet again, but this time, the meeting wasn't at the bank. It was at Ellison's corporate headquarters. When Ethan arrived, he was led to a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Ellison was already there, along with several members of his executive team. "Ethan," Ellison said, gesturing for him to sit, "I've been thinking about what you've accomplished and how we can take it further." Ellison explained that he wanted to partner with the bank on a new initiative, a joint program that combined financial literacy with technology training, aimed at preparing underserved communities for careers in the tech industry. "The world is changing," Ellison said, "and if we want these communities to thrive, we need to give them the tools to compete in the modern economy. Your work has shown me that you and your team have the drive and the vision to make this happen." Ethan was stunned. The opportunity was enormous, not just for the bank, but for the community. He felt a surge of gratitude and determination. "We're honored, Mr. Ellison," he said, "and we won't let you down." Ellison smiled. "I know you won't, Ethan. Let's get to work." As Ethan left the meeting, he felt a sense of accomplishment he had never experienced before. He had started this journey trying to fix a mistake, but it had become something much bigger, a mission to create real, lasting change. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Building bridges. The announcement of the partnership between Southern Crescent Bank and Richard Ellison's foundation sent ripples through the community and beyond. The joint initiative, named Bridge to Tomorrow, promised to equip individuals in underserved areas with the financial and technological skills needed to thrive in the modern economy. It was an ambitious project, and for Ethan Caldwell, it was both an honor and a monumental challenge. As soon as the press release went live, the calls began flooding in. Community leaders wanted to know how they could get involved. Local schools and organizations reached out to inquire about training programs. Even national media outlets took an interest, portraying the partnership as a model for public-private collaboration. Ethan barely had a moment to breathe. His days were a blur of meetings, planning sessions, and site visits, but the intensity of the work only fueled his determination. This was his chance to cement the bank's role as a pillar of the community and to prove to himself and others that his transformation was real. The Launchpad. The first major milestone of the initiative was the establishment of the Launchpad, a combined financial literacy and technology training center located in the heart of one of Atlanta's most underserved neighborhoods. The building itself was a renovated warehouse, transformed into a sleek, modern space filled with state-of-the-art computers, classrooms, and conference rooms. On the morning of the grand opening, Ethan stood outside the building, watching as people began to gather. Families, students, and local entrepreneurs milled about, their faces filled with curiosity and hope. The energy was palpable, and Ethan felt a surge of pride as he saw his vision coming to life. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a grand affair. Richard Ellison stood alongside Ethan, both men addressing the crowd with heartfelt speeches. "This isn't just a building," Ellison said, his voice resonating through the speakers. "It's a promise that no matter where you come from, you deserve the tools and opportunities to succeed. And together, we're going to make that happen." The crowd erupted in applause, their enthusiasm echoing off the brick walls of the surrounding buildings. Ethan stepped up to the podium next, his heart pounding. "I've learned a lot over the past few months," he began, his voice steady. "But the most important lesson is this: change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we come together, when we listen to each other, and when we commit to building a better future, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Ethan felt a swell of emotion. This wasn't just about redemption anymore. It was about purpose. The first challenge. The opening of the launchpad was a success, but the real work was only beginning. Within weeks, the center was buzzing with activity. Workshops on budgeting and credit management filled to capacity. Tech training classes, teaching everything from basic computer skills to coding, had waitlists. The demand was overwhelming, and it quickly became clear that the team was stretched thin. Ethan knew they needed more resources, more instructors, more funding, more everything. But as he began drafting proposals for additional grants and partnerships, he encountered resistance from within the bank. "Do we really want to invest more into this?" questioned David Carlson, a senior executive at the bank, during a meeting. "The return on investment isn't clear. We're already committing a significant amount of resources, and there's no guarantee this will pay off." Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain calm. "This isn't just an investment in the community. It's an investment in the bank's future," he argued. "The goodwill we're building here will translate into customer loyalty, brand reputation, and long-term growth." David shook his head. "That's all well and good, but we need concrete results. Numbers, not ideals." The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan realized that he needed to prove not just the moral value of the initiative, but its financial viability as well. The metrics that matter. Over the next month, Ethan worked tirelessly to compile data and success stories from the launchpad. He hired an independent consulting firm to analyze the program's impact, focusing on metrics like increased savings among participants, new business startups, and job placements in the tech sector. One of the most compelling stories came from a young woman named Angela, who had attended a tech training course at the center. A single mother of two, Angela had struggled to find stable employment, but after completing the program, she secured a job as a software developer at a local firm, doubling her previous income. "When I walked into that first class, I didn't think someone like me could ever work in tech," Angela said in a testimonial video. "But the launchpad gave me the skills and the confidence to dream bigger. Now, I'm not just providing for my kids, I'm showing them that anything is possible." Ethan presented these findings to the bank's executive team, his voice filled with passion as he made his case. "This isn't just a feel-good story," he said, pointing to a slide showing the program's economic impact. "It's a roadmap for how we can drive meaningful change while strengthening our business. These are the numbers that matter, not just to our bottom line, but to our community." The room was silent for a moment, and then David Carlson spoke. "You've made your point, Ethan," he said, his tone grudgingly respectful. "Let's move forward." A growing movement. With renewed support from the bank, the Launchpad expanded its programs, opening satellite centers in other underserved neighborhoods. The initiative gained national recognition, attracting the attention of policymakers and industry leaders. Ethan was invited to speak at conferences and panels, sharing the story of Bridge to Tomorrow and its impact. But despite the accolades, he remained focused on the work itself, constantly seeking ways to improve and adapt the programs to meet the community's needs. One evening, as Ethan was leaving the original Launchpad Center, he noticed a group of teenagers gathered around a computer. They were working on a coding project, their faces lit with excitement as they debated how to solve a problem. Ethan paused, watching them from a distance. This was what it was all about: the spark of possibility, the belief that the future could be brighter. As he walked to his car, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been far from easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every setback. Because in the end, it wasn't just about building bridges for others. It was about crossing them together. Resistance and resilience. The success of Bridge to Tomorrow and the Launchpad didn't come without challenges. While the program was celebrated in many circles, it also drew criticism and resistance from those who saw it as a disruption to the status quo. Ethan Caldwell found himself in the middle of a storm, navigating complex social and institutional barriers that threatened the progress they had made. Corporate backlash. The first signs of resistance came from within Southern Crescent Bank. While the executive team had initially supported the expansion of the initiative, murmurs of dissent began to surface as the financial commitment grew. Some board members expressed concerns about the long-term sustainability of the program, questioning whether the resources allocated to Bridge to Tomorrow could be better spent on traditional banking operations. At the center of this resistance was David Carlson, the senior executive who had always been skeptical of Ethan's vision. During a quarterly board meeting, Carlson made his stance clear. "Ethan, I don't think anyone here questions the good intentions behind this initiative," Carlson said, his tone sharp but measured. "But we're a bank, not a charity. Our primary responsibility is to our shareholders, and I'm concerned that this program is diverting resources from our core business." Ethan stood at the head of the conference table, his hands gripping the edge as he listened. He could feel the eyes of the other board members on him, some nodding in agreement with Carlson's words. "David," Ethan began, his voice steady but firm, "I understand your concerns, but this isn't just about goodwill. It's about creating long-term value for the community and for the bank. The trust we're building through this initiative is already translating into increased customer loyalty and new business opportunities. We're not just giving back. We're investing in our future." Carlson raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Trust and loyalty don't pay the bills, Ethan. We need numbers, not narratives." Ethan paused, taking a deep breath. He knew this was his moment to make or break the program's future. "Let me remind everyone," he said, addressing the room, "that in the last quarter alone, Bridge to Tomorrow brought in over $10 million in new deposits from community members and small businesses who now see Southern Crescent Bank as a partner they can trust. We've also secured over $5 million in grants and corporate sponsorships to support the program. This isn't just a cost, it's a revenue stream. And it's only the beginning." The room fell silent. Carlson leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, but he held his ground, meeting the gaze of each board member in turn. Finally, the chairman of the board spoke. "Ethan," she said, her tone measured, "you've made a compelling case. Let's continue to monitor the program's performance and revisit this discussion in 6 months. For now, you have our support." Relief washed over Ethan, but he knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The real work was far from over. Community challenges. As the Launchpad expanded into new neighborhoods, it faced resistance from some local leaders and organizations who were wary of the bank's intentions. Accusations of gentrification and profit-driven motives began to surface, threatening to erode the trust they had worked so hard to build. Ethan knew they needed to address these concerns head-on. He scheduled a series of town hall meetings in each community, inviting residents to voice their opinions and share their concerns. At one such meeting in a historically black neighborhood, the tension in the room was palpable. Community members filled the small auditorium, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. As Ethan stepped up to the microphone, he felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice calm but resolute. "I want to start by saying that we're not here to tell you what your community needs. We're here to listen. We're here to learn. And most importantly, we're here to work with you to create opportunities that benefit everyone." For the next 2 hours, Ethan listened as residents voiced their concerns. Some worried that the bank's presence would drive up property values and push out longtime residents. Others questioned whether the programs were truly accessible to everyone, or if they catered only to those with prior financial or technological knowledge. Ethan took notes, his mind racing with ideas for how they could address these issues. By the end of the meeting, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The next day, he convened his team to discuss their strategy. "We need to make some changes," he said, his tone decisive. "First, we're going to partner with local organizations that already have the community's trust. Second, we're going to create a scholarship program to ensure that cost is never a barrier to participation. And third, we're going to hire staff directly from these neighborhoods, so the people running these programs are the same people who understand the challenges firsthand." Personal struggles. As the program grew, so did the demands on Ethan's time and energy. He often found himself working late into the night, reviewing reports and planning the next phase of the initiative. The pressure was immense, and it began to take a toll on his personal life. One evening, as Ethan sat at his dining table poring over spreadsheets, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his sister, reminding him of their mother's birthday dinner the next day. Ethan frowned, realizing he had completely forgotten about it. He hadn't seen his family in weeks, and guilt gnawed at him. The next evening, he arrived at the restaurant late, his mind still racing with thoughts of work. His mother greeted him with a warm smile, but Ethan could see the disappointment in her eyes. "You're here now," she said, patting his hand. "That's what matters." But as the evening went on, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing touch with the people who mattered most. After dinner, his sister pulled him aside. "Look, Ethan," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "We're proud of what you're doing, but you need to find balance. You can't pour from an empty cup." Her words stayed with him long after he returned home. He knew she was right, but finding that balance seemed impossible. A glimmer of hope. Despite the challenges, there were moments that reminded Ethan why he had taken on this mission. One such moment came during a visit to one of the satellite centers, where he met a young man named Jamal. Jamal had grown up in a neighborhood plagued by poverty and violence, but he had always been a talented artist with a dream of starting his own graphic design business. Through the Launchpad, Jamal had learned not only the technical skills he needed, but also the financial literacy to manage his business. As Jamal showed Ethan his portfolio, his eyes lit up with excitement. "I used to think people like me didn't get opportunities like this," Jamal said. "But now, I'm not just dreaming, I'm doing." Ethan felt a lump in his throat as he shook Jamal's hand. Moments like this made every late night and difficult meeting worth it. As Ethan drove home that evening, he reflected on the journey so far. The road ahead would be just as challenging, if not more so, but he was ready. Because in the end, this wasn't just about programs or partnerships. It was about people, redemption, and legacy. As the dust settled on the growing success of Bridge to Tomorrow and the Launchpad, the true weight of the program's impact began to emerge. Ethan Caldwell's vision had sparked a transformative wave, not just within Southern Crescent Bank, but across the communities it touched. However, the journey was far from over. The final phase of Ethan's mission was not only about scaling the program, but also addressing the lingering scars of resistance, personal challenges, and the need to cement a lasting legacy, a public reckoning. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan received an unexpected email from a national financial news network. They wanted to feature Bridge to Tomorrow in a documentary series highlighting innovative banking practices. Ethan felt a surge of pride, but also a tinge of nervousness. The program had grown significantly, but not all of its stories were triumphant. When the cameras arrived a week later, they documented everything: the bustling community centers, the thriving entrepreneurs, and the grateful families who had benefited from financial literacy courses. But they also uncovered the moments of friction: the skeptical board members, the protests from wary community leaders, and the lingering criticisms that the bank's involvement might have ulterior motives. Ethan faced these questions head-on during his interview. "People ask why a bank would invest so heavily in a program like this," Ethan said, sitting in the modest conference room of one of the bank's new community hubs. And the answer is simple. It's about trust. Banking isn't just about numbers. It's about people. If we don't uplift the communities we serve, then we've failed, not just as a business, but as human beings. The journalist pressed further. But what about those who claim this is a PR stunt? That it's just a way to attract more customers? Ethan didn't flinch. I can't control what people choose to believe, he said calmly. What I can control is the work we do. If helping people build better lives also builds trust in our institution, then that's a win for everyone. The real question is, why aren't more banks doing the same? The documentary aired a month later, and the response was overwhelming. Praise poured in from community leaders, advocacy groups, and even government officials. But it also reignited the internal debates within Southern Crescent Bank, with some board members worried that the increased visibility might attract more scrutiny than they were prepared to handle. The final showdown. Not long after the documentary aired, Ethan was called into an emergency board meeting. The tone of the email was ominous, and as Ethan walked into the sleek, glass-walled boardroom, he sensed the tension in the air. David Carlson, the senior executive who had long opposed Ethan's initiatives, was already seated, flipping through a thick stack of papers. The other board members sat in silence, their expressions ranging from neutral to concerned. Ethan, Carlson began, his voice measured but sharp. While we all appreciate the visibility Bridge to Tomorrow has brought to the bank, we need to discuss the financial implications. Our quarterly projections show that the program's operational costs are exceeding initial estimates. This level of spending is unsustainable. Ethan nodded, expecting this line of attack. He had come prepared. David, Ethan replied, his tone steady. Those projections don't account for the long-term benefits. Since the program launched, our customer retention rate has increased by 20%, and we've seen a 35% uptick in new account openings from underserved communities. This isn't just an expense, it's an investment in the bank's future. Carlson wasn't convinced. And what happens if the economy takes a downturn? Programs like this are the first to be cut when budgets tighten. We need to prioritize. Ethan took a deep breath. I agree that we need to be fiscally responsible, but cutting Bridge to Tomorrow would be short-sighted. It's not just about numbers. It's about our reputation, our values, and the impact we're making. If we abandon this now, we're sending a message that we only care about profits, not people. The room fell silent. The chairman of the board finally spoke. Ethan, she said, her voice calm but firm, we've reviewed your data, and it's clear the program has had a significant impact. But the question remains, how do we ensure its sustainability without jeopardizing the bank's financial health? Ethan leaned forward. We expand our partnerships. We've already secured grants and sponsorships from local businesses and nonprofits. If we scale that model, we can offset the operational costs while continuing to grow the program. After hours of deliberation, the board reached a decision. Bridge to Tomorrow would continue, but under stricter oversight and with a renewed focus on securing external funding. Ethan saw it as a victory, albeit a hard-fought one. A personal turning point. While Ethan had won the battle at the boardroom table, he was losing one in his personal life. His sister's words about balance still echoed in his mind, but he hadn't made much progress in addressing them. His relentless focus on the program had strained his relationships with family and friends. One evening, after yet another late night at the office, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from his mother. Ethan, I'm proud of you, but we miss you. Don't forget that you're part of our family, too. The message hit him like a ton of bricks. He realized that in his quest to help others, he had been neglecting the people who had always supported him. That weekend, Ethan made a conscious decision to reconnect. He visited his mother, spent time with his sister, and even reconnected with old friends he hadn't seen in years. These moments of reconnection gave him a renewed sense of purpose and reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place, a lasting legacy. In the years that followed, Bridge to Tomorrow became a national model for community banking initiatives. Other financial institutions began adopting similar programs, and Ethan found himself speaking at conferences, sharing the lessons he had learned. One of his proudest moments came when the Launchpad helped a young entrepreneur named Maria Rodriguez secure funding for her tech startup. Maria's business grew rapidly, creating jobs in her community and inspiring others to pursue their dreams. At the grand opening of Maria's new office, she approached Ethan with tears in her eyes. "None of this would have been possible without you," she said. Ethan shook his head, his voice filled with emotion. "This was all you, Maria. We just gave you the tools. You did the rest." As Ethan looked around the room, filled with people whose lives had been changed by Bridge to Tomorrow, he felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. This was his legacy, not the titles, not the accolades, but the lives he had touched and the communities he had helped uplift. A new chapter. Years later, as Ethan prepared to step down from his role at Southern Crescent Bank, he reflected on his journey. What had started as a simple act of standing up to prejudice had grown into something far greater, a movement that redefined what it meant to be a bank, a leader, and a human being. At his farewell ceremony, Ethan addressed the crowd one last time. "Success isn't about how much we achieve for ourselves," he said. "It's about how much we contribute to others. Bridge to Tomorrow isn't just a program. It's a promise that no matter who you are or where you come from, there's always a way forward." As the crowd erupted in applause, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced challenges, overcome resistance, and made sacrifices along the way. But in the end, he had stayed true to his values. And that, he knew, was worth everything.